background. It's a pleasure today to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Kiley Daley. What's really fascinating and wonderful about his background is it's all of these things that I think we're going to have to bring together, whether it's in one person or in a team, to tackle really complicated and important sustainability problems. So let me just give you a sense of it. A bachelor's degree in applied management, coursework in social, medical, and biological anthropology, an interdisciplinary PhD in environmental studies and public health from Dalhousie. Along the way, specialized training in quantitative microbial risk assessment at Michigan State, where I was a postdoc, population intervention for disease prevention, ecosystem approaches to health. He lived in Nunavut and worked with Inuit communities for 2 years to kind of figure out how to make this work on the ground. As you'll see, a big focus on water and security at both the community level and the household level, multiple scales of how we're going to have to get this right. He's an expert in risk assessment, in participatory research and the best practices for community engagement. And we're very fortunate at this university to have a number of faculty who are global experts in that work. And it's nice to have Kiley join their ranks. He's done a lot of work with rural communities and in Indigenous communities. We have a lot of rural communities right here in Maine. And as you'll see in his talk, a lot of the problems he's worked on in other places are equally relevant here. I'll give you one quick example. If you have looked at any papers recently, you'll see that PFAS, these forever chemicals, nonstick coatings, are in our water and in our bodies, right here in Maine. In about half of the Maine population depends on private wells. And I can promise you there's a lot of concern about this in areas like Fairfield, Maine. Well, that's a really complicated problem. You need the kind of expertise that Kiley and others bring to this problem. And I'm happy to say that there is a team on this campus. I think it's one of the leading ones in the country that has social science expertise, natural science expertise, engineering expertise to work on this. I was just talking with Kiley in the back of the room. Hope we can get him to participate in that work as well. So he's got a lot of this deep experience of what I think of as interdisciplinary teamwork, working with natural scientists, social scientists, engineers. We live in different worlds when we're trained in one of those areas, and it takes somebody special to help figure out how all of that can come together to focus on a problem and come up with solutions. Kiley's currently teaching a couple classes. He's an adjunct instructor in the Ecology and Environmental Sciences program. He's an associate at the Climate Change Institute at UMaine. And today, his talk is titled Access for All, Examining Water, Insecurity, and Health in the United States and Canada. Welcome, Kiley.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you everyone who's here today. I just want to start by saying, David talked about the Sustainability Center being experts in complex problems. Hearing David talk about how this hybrid session works with this person moderating questions and all of you folks here, I can tell you that it's a bit of a case study. So if something does go wrong on that side, that's on me and not on all these great folks here. So let's see my first little test if I can work within their world here and get some slides out. Well done. Okay. That's the first test. That's great. But sincerely, thank you very much, David, Ruth, Carol, everyone here at the Mitchell Center. Of course, all you folks attending here, as well as those virtually. Really happy to be here and have this opportunity to speak with you all. David told you a bit about my rambling story, so I'll try to keep that part light and focus on what it is that I'm interested and what I think is really an important issue. And as David talked about, it has applications globally. I'm going to talk a lot about what I've seen and what I've tried to contribute to coming up with solutions on these issues, primarily in our rural and remote Arctic regions. And what might that mean for Maine? Where might we make some progress on issues like this closer to home? So, access for all, examining water security and health in the United States and Canada. So, I'm not going to spend much time here. A great introduction from David, which I appreciated. as he mentioned, as of most recently, I have a PhD in environmental studies and health. And I do come from interdisciplinary training. And what I would say that means is when we think about human environment interactions, where I kind of get my work done is in that really messy middle area. So right where the human, where we and the environment interact. And in particular, what I'm most interested in is the human health repercussions. What's happening at those human and environment interactions, environmental exposures, that kind of thing. Are there interventions, risk mitigations we can do to improve health? It's not just always about the detrimental effects. And I would say, primarily, I contribute with social science research methods, and in particular, drawing from geography and epidemiology. Again, as David kind of mentioned, whenever possible, whenever it makes sense for the problem, it's really about community work and participatory type methods when I look into the problems. What I've come to find out, and which I'll touch on at a few points through my presentation, is that the population that is most impacted by a problem, they probably sure know a lot about some ideas about how to solve it. And it's really about hearing about those and seeing what we can do as academics, as researchers, as students. What expertise can we bring to contribute to that area? And in particular, I'm most interested in type of research, water, sanitation, and hygiene, sometimes by the global acronym WASH, some people are familiar with, rural, remote, and Indigenous health, Indigenous communities, as we've heard about. And in particular, some human health risk assessment. So how can we take some of this information, some of this environmental data, whether it's about water, other types of materials, pollutants, and combine that with the way humans are interacting and put those into some kind of package, some kind of risk assessment where we can really work on solutions, where we can inform policy. And so today, what I'm going to talk about is to try to apply all of that to water insecurity in particular. So what am I talking about when I'm talking about water insecurity? Well, it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people in a lot of different places. Broadly defined, what we'll have as sort of a working definition for today is the lack of adequate and safe water to sustain a healthy and productive life. So it's not always just about disease. It's about a healthy and productive life. Do people feel like they can thrive in their setting? Do they, and if we're talking about water in particular, around these types of things and a broader definition of health and wellness, do people have what they need to feel comfortable, that they can move forward, that they can make their own decisions, and they're not held back by limits of water on impacts on their health? This is shaped by interconnected biophysical characteristics and human dimensions. So we have water stress natural environments, inadequate infrastructure. It has a lot to do with policy and as well sociocultural dynamics. Typically, again, when we're talking about water security, there's sort of three major water usage categories. So we think about agricultural water use, industrial water use, and domestic. So today, and in most of my work, I focus on the latter, that being domestic water use at the household, at the community level. So water quality and water quantity. So these are kind of two components, two streams, if you will, of water insecurity. So these can occur both at a water source or somewhere within the distribution system. So as water is moving from its source to a household, to a person, to where we need it. Quality issues includes things like water contamination, so microbial, chemical contamination, heavy metals, and quantity issues are when we're talking about water shortages, water disruptions. And a link back to the Mitchell Center here. So as I was preparing for this talk, the Mitchell Center and the state government in Maine and researchers here at the University of Maine and many different groups have been working on water issues for a long time. And I actually came across a paper that David and John Peckinham and others who are affiliated with the Mitchell Center wrote a number of years ago, The Path to Sustainable Water Resource Solutions. And in particular, highlighted somewhere in their paper was this quote from former Senator Muskie. And this was another definition, a nice broad definition that I would apply to water insecurity. And what I really liked about it in particular as it relates to my interests in health is somewhere in the middle of that quote you see from Senator Muskie: high quality water in the right quantity at the right place at the right time. And I just kind of thought that was quite amazing to sort of come across this as I was preparing to come here and talk to you all here at the Mitchell Center today, and hope to kind of carry that thread forward of all the good work that's been done here in the past. So as I said, what my primary interest is when it comes to water is the human health side. How can it impact us? How can it improve our health? How can it put us in a position to feel better and do better? So contaminated water, associated with infectious disease, cancerous chronic diseases, neurological damage. Water shortages, again, it can infect us in many ways and at all life stages. So water shortages are associated with poor birth outcomes and delayed growth in children, but also with hypertension and reduced kidney function in adults. There's broader links between water security, obviously, and food insecurity, cognitive impairment, and issues of poor mental health. And then again, broader still, water insecurity has far-reaching impacts, social, economic, and cultural aspects of life, including financial resources and time. So this is going back to sort of that broader definition of health and wellness. Are other areas of our life or people's lives perhaps impacted because we don't have the water that we need to make the decisions that we want? And so a lot of academic research tends to focus on water insecurity in low and middle income countries. Sometimes when we look and we turn directly to the academic literature, it's that water insecurity is something that's happening maybe somewhere else, but it's not happening here. And sometimes we see graphics like this, and water insecurity is absolutely one of the most important global health issues of our time. But sometimes when we see a graphic like this, it can be a little bit misleading when we think about what is happening here in North America, the United States, Canada. Because water insecurity is an important issue in many high-income countries as well, including parts of the United States and Canada. So we can see here in the graphic, with the average person in the US using 156 gallons a day. That certainly far exceeds some of these other countries that are presented. So again, this is just another quick map of what you're meant to take away from this. So this is total withdrawals and deliveries of water for domestic use. Withdrawals and deliveries, withdrawals being water that's supplied by municipal systems, so people on piped water. Sorry, backwards, that's deliveries. Withdrawals would be people on public wells. But all you're meant to see from this is that, this map kind of follows the trends of population. So we can see states like California, Texas, Florida withdrawing the most water, obviously. With even the most minimal having somewhere between 51 and 250 gallons per person. If everybody had that much, things wouldn't be so bad. That'd be probably more than enough to get by. So let's think about what that looks like now in some particular states as well as some provinces. So just quickly, kind of based on maybe that first graphic that talked about that 156 gallons, I'll give you a bit of a cheat sheet. That would certainly be the max. So does anybody here have any ideas? Maybe we'll take a guess at Maine or our neighbor, New Hampshire, about the average domestic water use per gallon. This is your domestic use. I think this is the part where Pat Sajak as well would say, for those playing at home, you can write this down on your paper. All right, anyone with a brave guess?
180.
Okay, we have one. Okay, we had another one. We had a 180, we had an 80. We're getting all around it. So keeping in mind the methods of estimating domestic water use vary between sources, how this information is collected. Here's what I found when I looked across a few different sources. We actually have Maine being kind of on the lower end, but that's still 55 gallons per day. Again, if everybody had that, that would probably be fairly comfortable. And we see pretty similar numbers with our neighbors in New Hampshire, some of our Canadian neighbors in New Brunswick and Quebec, with a little bit higher values in California and Arizona. Again, these being average use. But the problem with averages is that they don't tell the whole story. So with this map, again, what you're meant to take away from this quickly, with this obviously is a global map, the number of people without access to safe drinking water. Safe drinking water in this particular metric being defined as an improved source location on the premises, available when needed, and free from contamination. So as I said, when I'm up here talking, I'm not blind and we're not ignoring that this is a really serious issue in many places around the world. For today, when we do have a look at Canada and the US, we can see that's not zero. We see these lightly shaded green colors, but when we look down at the legend, we're still talking at somewhere between 1 million or even between 1 and 5 million people here in the US and Canada. And this is what I mean by averages don't tell the whole story. So these numbers that we were talking about, whether it was 55 gallons, 150 gallons, that's not uniform. Water insecurity is an important concern for many people and communities in the United States and Canada. So these, again, are just some estimates that about 1.1 million people in the United States lack piped water. And another source that I found out there, this number varies. This number could vary. You may check this now, and today it would be different than it would be tomorrow, but approximately 70% of water systems in First Nations communities in Canada at a medium or high risk of water contamination. So a broad view of the academic literature, what it tells us right now about water insecurity in Canada and the US is that Indigenous communities, people of color, and low-income households are the ones who are disproportionately experiencing household water insecurity. You know, these are just a couple different headlines, a few different stories, kind of highlighting some of the possible spots. Some of these are very recent. The headline with the photo is from Nunavut, Canada. We're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to talk quite a bit about that later. This is sort of a water emergency that's currently unfolding there. We see some headlines about issues in Flint and Detroit, Michigan in the last few years. As well as some other Indigenous communities in Canada. And so what that background was meant to do was kind of lead us to some work that I've done on these types of issues, specifically in remote communities, in Inuit communities in Arctic Canada. And again, kind of going back to David's introduction a little bit, I'll just quickly mention sort of how this became a really important issue and what kind of led me to this type of work. So when I finished my undergrad degrees, I know there's many undergrads here in the room and perhaps online as well. I was one of those people who decided to take some time off and go look at some other things and get away from the university setting for a little bit. And life experience, I think, is what it's sometimes called. And so I found myself, by choice, going to Nunavut, which is an Arctic territory in Canada. So in case you haven't picked it up by the accent, now I am Canadian. And, you know, I'm from a rural area in the Maritimes. And all of a sudden I found myself here in these remote Inuit communities, about 500 to 1,000 people. I went with a company that brought people there to actually work in what was more or less grocery stores. But by grocery stores, they also fixed your snowmobile, did your banking, that kind of thing. You know, so the work left a little bit to be desired, but it was really a formative time in my life. Spent time living in these communities, really getting to know people. And it was such a privilege to really see kind of the joys of the life of like a really tightly family and community tightly knit lifestyle. And again, as I said, sort of being just from a rural other area of Canada, I really had no idea that this was a part of my country, a part of North America. And as I said, I saw a lot, and I really saw the joy of the people and the way they experienced life there. But at the same time, I also saw some of the hardships, some of the social and health issues that people deal with. Again, some of the most resilient, adaptable people on the planet. But life isn't easy every day. And so I took those things and they kind of muddled around a little bit. And then when I did decide to come back home and start to pursue a graduate education, I kind of had these ideas and I started to think about what type of education, what type of training is going to help me solve problems like this and work with and work for communities on these types of issues. And just so to give everyone a better idea of where exactly it is I'm talking about. So what we have here, actually a map supplied by the Can-Am Center here at UMaine, is a big map of Canada, and we have a bit of the United States and a bit of Greenland as well. So Nunavut is top center. So just a quick little geography lesson on Nunavut. In 1999, through a lands claim agreement, they became their own distinct territory, separate of the Northwest Territories. This landmass is about the size of Mexico. But in total, there's about 35 to 40,000 people who live there. It's about 85% Inuit, the indigenous peoples of the region. And of those 35, 40,000 people, when I say the word remote communities, I'll tell you what I'm talking about. There's about 25 communities in this area. However, none of them are connected in any way by any roads. So these are all fly-in communities. So if you're flying from southern parts of Canada, that's the only way to get there. There is an open water season, but these communities also aren't connected to each other than flying back and forth. So what we're talking about getting on to how this connects to water is you have about 25 remote communities. Most, let's say the average about 1,000 people, 1,000, 2,000 people. Each of these communities, these tiny communities, need to have their own public works. They need to find a way to provide safe drinking water, to have sanitation systems that safely remove wastewater. At the same time as all this sort of heavy infrastructure, expensive type services, oh, by the way, we need schools, we need clinics, that kind of thing. So these are the sort of challenges that we talk about when we think about remote and rural communities as well. That it's not all so idyllic. These, there needs to be services. There needs to be ways that people can stay healthy as well. And there's just not the same economies of scale sometimes in other places. So what is so different? Okay, so they need water and wastewater, of course. So here's what really quickly separates it from the types of water systems that we may not think about a lot, but that we have. So here in Maine and in most parts of North America, we have our underground sewage, our underground water distribution systems. Many people here in Maine, especially in the rural areas, we do have wells. Others have, town water or source water. But again, underground plumbing for the most part. In the Arctic, it doesn't really work that well. Permafrost issues, climate, it's expensive for all kinds of issues, all kinds of reasons. That's typically not how the water distribution system works. Instead, we have trucked water systems. So in the top photos there, that's potable water. So a truck comes to your house every couple days, fills up a holding tank inside your home. And that's your drinking water, your water for washing, cleaning, that kind of thing. In your home, you also have a holding tank where the water that you use drains away. So your gray water, your wastewater, a different truck comes and pumps that out every few days and takes it to a municipal wastewater treatment area. So we'll talk about all that a little bit more, but just to kind of give you an overview of this is what water systems look like in these communities. So now I'm going to tell you, give you examples. Two different projects that I worked on in this water insecurity type topic in these regions. So this first one, this was what I talked about when I was there, sort of in between degrees. What really caught my eye, I would see large families, friends of mine, people I work with, who were running out of water at their home almost daily. And when I had a chance to go back and work on these types of issues, it was one of the first questions that I was most interested in because I knew it was important to communities. It was kind of understanding how these trucked water distribution systems are impacting health at the household level. So during my graduate degrees, this is a bit of an old paper, but I'll show you why I think it's really relevant in a slide or two. We worked with a hamlet of Coral Harbor. So this is one of the smaller communities, as well as a number of territorial departments, in particular Public Works, those who provide water, as well as the Department of Health, and as well the local health clinic. So I mentioned in each of these communities, there's a health clinic or some sort of small, at least maybe a nurse or two nurses, that kind of thing. And the type of data we use. So, thinking about if you're here in this room or joining us virtually, you're probably at least somewhat interested in interdisciplinary work, given that it's kind of a trademark of the Mitchell Center. So in thinking about what do we need to know and how can we put this together to really, make an applied, meaningful contribution. So what I decided to do was collect household water quantity data. So this was data that was available from these hamlets. So there was records, a truck goes to address 155 3 times a week. They deliver that much water. I know how big these tanks are, that kind of thing. So we're typically talking about water quantity data. At the same time, I've worked on projects that looked into water quality with these types of systems as well. Maybe we can talk about that another time. But it wasn't just about water quantity. I needed to know more about the usage patterns. What is life like for these families? What is their water life like? How are they using it? When do they need a lot? When are some times that maybe, they could use a little bit less? How many people live in each of these homes? This photo that's here on the screen is showing this is one of those water tanks inside your homes. So you have a finite amount of water. It doesn't really matter what's going on in your home, how many people are there. Maybe there's a big family gathering. Maybe it's a holiday. You have the same amount of water, no matter what, no matter how many people were there. So it really depended on how people were using it in their day-to-day life. And again, what we found out from this study with one community, so one community case study, was that the daily average water use was 29 gallons per person. So let's just think back a few slides ago when I was showing the averages from a couple, Maine, as well as a few other states, as well as some Canadian provinces. Maine, which, we know how to conserve, we don't waste things. We were still at an average 55 gallons per person. So here we're seeing 29 gallons, we're getting to almost half of that. But again, there's problems with averages when we talk about this. There's more than 50% of the overcrowded homes in our study, they were experiencing water shortages. So what this graph shows, this is some additional data. This is the proportion of unsuitable housing in Nunavut. So what the small bar on my right shows is the Canadian average at about 5%. So that's saying about 5% of Canadian homes are overcrowded or considered unsuitable. In Nunavut, unfortunately, that number is up over 30%. So overcrowding isn't just an issue for a few people, it's an issue for a lot of people. And these are the ones who are experiencing water shortages. So numbers are good, averages are good, bar charts are good. They tell a little bit about the story. But these are a few participant quotes. So this was largely a qualitative study, kind of complemented with some pretty basic quantitative water data. So I'm just going to read these aloud, a few participant quotes from this study. So these were people who participated, who volunteered to have myself and others working on the project in their home, learning about water, learning about their life. So one quote is, 6 live in this house, 6 people. Well, it could be more at times when relatives sleep over. When there's more, we run out of water every 2 or 3 days. Another participant added, I've been waiting for water since this morning, with the interview having been conducted at 4 p.m. I live in a row house unit with a shared water tank. So this would be equivalent to, townhouses that are connected, but it's just one water tank, and it's a bit of an honor system on who uses the most. This person went on to say, all of us in this unit have babies. So maybe twice a week, 3 times a week, we run out of water. When it's almost gone, I always save a little bit of water for my little one. That's about it, as in that's all we can do. You can't use the toilet until you get your water refilled up again. So it kind of gives you a bit of that human message on what this kind of really looks like for day-to-day life. So the main conclusion from this first example being that, as I mentioned, water insecurity is really limiting the ability to adhere to, to public health guidance, which is some really basic public health practices. And what we recommended, based on this case study, was increasing the frequency of water delivery. As I said, this study is a few years old now. The reality is we didn't get a lot of traction. It's expensive to increase the water delivery. But all of a sudden, 2020 comes around. We obviously know the COVID pandemic is here in North America. Sanitation, good hand hygiene have become precedent again, some of these pillars of public health. And a story comes out that $1.25 million have been available for Nunavut hamlets to deliver water to households daily. So I can't say that this one case study is what directly led to this, but I'm just pointing out that this is an issue. We were able to identify it way back. Sometimes things move slow, but what we found on was an important issue, and there was a little bit of pressure applied for the wrong reasons in this case. It came up to the forefront. So I'm going to go through another example here, and I'm going to start to move a little quicker. I want to make sure we have some time for questions. So far I've largely been talking about potable water, drinking water, water that we have in our home for our washing, looking after ourselves, preparing food. We're going to talk a little bit, if you don't hold it against me now, I'm going to move to wastewater a little bit, what's sometimes called sanitation. We're going to talk a little bit about that side of the water systems in the Arctic. So what we have here on the screen are 2 pictures. I talked a little bit about kind of Arctic Water 101, drinking water going into your house, wastewater going out. So that truck filled with the wastewater from your home goes somewhere. Again, there's no underground plumbing. So typically what we see in Nunavut and in most North American Arctic communities are one of 2 systems. So there's a mechanical system, which is a treatment plant that typically discharges directly to a marine environment, or the other picture is a passive system. That's not a swimming pool there, it's what's called a wastewater stabilization pond. These trucks deposit water there. It's held for several months over the course of the summer, some natural treatment. Then the word decanted is used. We typically save that when we're talking about wine, but wastewater likes to use that word too. So we go through the tundra wetland, again, for some more natural treatment to a marine discharge. What you need to know about this is you don't need an engineering degree. What you should take away is that these are really basic treatment systems. And in a lot of ways, they're really advantageous for the region. I talked about, obviously the remote challenges, the climate challenges, the economic challenges. So I'm not an engineer, but I kind of have hung out with them a lot. And what I've learned is that typically the most basic system you need is the most basic system that will do the job is what you should have. Don't over-engineer. So in a lot of instances, in a lot of ways, these are fine. But what's important to keep in mind when we start to think about, well, this isn't only an engineering problem, is that there's minimum pathogen removal before this effluent is sent back into the environment. So why is that important when we remind ourselves that, well, this isn't only an engineering problem? It's because Inuit communities rely on their local environment as a valuable resource and provider. So it's an extension of the home, it's an extension of the living space, it's the pantry. So it's, you know, important for wild food harvesting is still very much a part of the culture, and not just for recreational purposes, but to provide food for families. We see shellfish harvesting is very important in many regions, many communities, and then we, you know, just wetland travel, shore recreation, all these things are an important part of life in these communities. So if we have people using their environment, sourcing food from their environment, but at the same time, wastewater is being treated just to minimal standards, there's going to be a health risk if these two areas overlap. And at the same time, gastrointestinal illness from food and waterborne exposure, not specifically just wastewater, but for many reasons, is disproportionately high in Inuit communities. So all you're meant to take away from this bar graph is that the two high bars on the right, these are Inuit communities, one being Iqaluit Nunavut, the other one being Rigolet Labrador, which is another Inuit region of Canada. The other three bars being southern, more typical Canadian cities or provinces. And so we put all that together. We have basic wastewater being discharged back into the environment. We have a community that's really reliant on their environment. And again, always sort of one thing, a theme that I try to carry through is I have some ideas and some things that might be important research questions, but to me, what's really important are the community's research questions. So I kind of got involved in this work, as I said, working with an engineering group who was working on a particular contract. They had a job to do that was really important, looking at a wastewater treatment system. As a part of that team, working with communities, we started to hear all these sort of different issues as well, and that's where this came from. So there was an interest in characterizing the risk of illness that was associated specifically with wastewater exposure scenarios. And of course, what type of solutions might we be able to come up to reduce that risk? Again, working with the hamlet governments, the territorial departments, and this time a lot of involvement from local food harvesters. So the people who are out there, they know where the areas are that these interactions might be occurring. What type of data do we use? So wastewater effluent data. So again, what is actually coming out of these wastewater treatment areas? What's the microbial composition? And then sort of the part that I kind of really like is this participatory epidemiology side. So this was site mapping, interviews, community forums, where we can, you know, through these different ways, learn about where are people, where might they be interacting with these hazard areas, and why might they be there? So, you know, there's a picture here of goose eggs that were in a wastewater treatment area. The other photo is of a map that was drawn by a food harvester. I think the green line on that map, if you can see it, was sort of the watershed. So we know where the wastewater treatment plant is, that kind of thing, what's going on in this area, and putting kind of some seasonal information around that as well. So when are people there and why are we there? Kind of trying to triangulate these different types of data into a health risk assessment model. So a graph that we won't spend too much time on, but here's what to take away from this one. That based on that health risk assessment, the incidence of gastrointestinal illness looked like it was moderate to high in 2 of the 5 communities that we work with. So the communities were Iqaluit, Pangertung, Pond Inlet, Sanikiluaq, and Nayat. The really high bar is Pangertung. The second highest was Nayat. What those dotted lines across was that that's a benchmark that was taken from that first graph that I showed you that said there seems to be high overall food and waterborne illness in these regions. So this high bar is quite concerning if we're blasting all the way through it on our health risk assessment model. What that is saying is that each and every person in this community, on average, this is how health risk assessment modeling works, would be experiencing 5 episodes of gastrointestinal illness per year from wastewater exposure. So I know there was a lot of bits to that. For our purposes, just know that that's pretty high and too high in a few of these communities. So we need to come up with some ideas of what are we going to do about it. Typically, you know, we have this information, but if you walk into the Hamlet's office and say you need an entirely new $20 million wastewater treatment plant because we think a few people based on our model might be sick, that usually isn't going to get you too far. But what we added to this research, what we added to our risk assessment models were some mitigation ideas. So some things about, well, what would this look like if the wastewater treatment system was a little bit better? What if it could reduce pathogens by this much? Not entirely, but by this much. And we started to think about some mitigations on the behavioral side. So is there some more basic public health things that we can use? Fencing, messaging, learning from the food harvesters about what are important times. Let me give you a quick example on that that gets to the population you're working with who's most affected, coming up with the solutions. So I talked about these wastewater treatment plants discharging to marine environments. Well, a really important species of fish in almost all communities in this region, but one in particular is char, a cousin of our salmon. And this community had already come up with a solution. They knew that the really important time when the big char run was going by, starting to come up, got excited. Coming upstream was in late September. So he already had a solution. This gentleman who he was the waterworks officer in this community. He just waited until that happened. It sounds pretty simple, but instead of a schedule that said, I always discharge the wastewater treatment pond on September 15th, he said, I just wait until the char run is gone. And there's some variation in that, but it really reduces the amount of people who are going to be there fishing, that kind of thing. So it sounds simple, but you know, it's probably the best solution when you think of it in a more holistic way. So just quickly, I tried to sort of weave this all through the presentation about the different kind of projects that I've worked on with communities and with all kinds of different partners. But community engagement and collaboration being a trademark of it all. So I talked about community forums as kind of both a data collection mechanism and as well as a way to share information through presentations. One of the funnest things I think that I ever got to do through all this work was to actually have a local radio call-in show. So talk a little bit about the research result with one of the community research assistants. People called in and asked questions. It was fantastic. Again, just kind of using things that make sense to the community instead of coming in with a research poster or that kind of thing, working within the customs. Of course, plain language summaries for communities and government partners as opposed to a big, thick research manuscript. School presentations and youth science camps. Again, you know, this was always the funnest part. So in a lot of these communities, the teachers are pretty happy to sort of have a day off or an afternoon off. And if a research student kind of wanders through town and is willing to go in and talk about things for 2 hours, that's usually pretty welcome. It's a great way to meet some people and sort of talk about and hear their perspectives. Here's some youth perspectives on what are important issues in the community. And presentations to the Water and Wastewater Trade Association. So I mentioned this with the Mitchell Center specifically because I know that they do a lot of this type of thing. So, you know, the grad students and undergraduate students who are here as well, we have our academic conferences, our associations, and those things are all great. But what I found with this type of work was really interesting was going and talking to wastewater professionals. So the people who run these treatment plants and these kind of things. They have their own conferences, their own associations. You know, it's quite interesting in what you're doing. So I see the time here just quickly. I don't want to just extrapolate what I've done in other places and say it's going to work directly here in Maine. But what I do want to take a minute is talk about some issues that I'm starting to learn about since I've been at the University of Maine about water health issues in Maine, and where maybe some of the things I've done there or some of the things that I think I know how to do might be applicable here. So what this quickly says is that Maine has a lot of power outages. And we know Mainers are tough, Mainers are resilient, and some people, most people maybe, can get through that no problem. But not everybody can. Not everybody has a generator. And if your power is out for a week and you're on a well and your pump that draws water into your home doesn't work for a week, that can be pretty tough. So I'm interested in those types of issues between our power outages and how that might affect water and health. The Passamaquoddy tribe in Pleasant Point. So there have been long-standing water problems. And as I said, I'm not involved in any of the work there. I know that a lot of great work has been done by the community and the tribe themselves. There's also the Wabanaki Public Health Group is doing a lot of great work. I found this paper about some other research that's already taking place there. This to me is just a really important issue. If there was any way that I might be able to make a meaningful contribution with one of these groups, that would be wonderful. And then finally, a bit more of a technical application. So I talked a little bit about my interest in human health risk assessment. So I know the Mitchell Center and others have long worked on beach and shellfish bed closures. So that's something I've been thinking about as well, might be an area to contribute. Final thoughts, just to reiterate everything I said. Issues at the water health nexus are influenced by both social and ecological dynamics. So we need to kind of think about these things in that way and try to sort of formulate solutions and what data do we need to answer the research questions. And I'm a big believer that those impacted by a problem, in particular a health problem, should be involved in the solution. Again, thank the Mitchell Center, all the various communities and partners that I've worked with through the Nunavut work. And I'd like to just very quickly also thank a student named Tess Redding Hofford. Tessa's home university is Western Washington. This summer, though, virtually, she was here at UMaine through an REU program, and she did a lot of great work that showed up in this presentation. Thank you.
So let's thank Kiley.
Hi, Kiley. That was such an informative and wonderful talk. It just, I'm just certain that when you meet with the students in just a few minutes, they're going to overwhelm you with how do we learn from you? How could we do the same kind of thing? And it will take a somewhat different form, of course. I mean, as I was listening, I was certainly thinking about growing up in Iowa and the real problems now with hog confinement and these huge industrial places being built right near the water, where people get their water, and just you did such a great job of talking about how all these things are interconnected. You know, the what you're doing in terms of where you're getting your food, where your wastewater is going. And we frequently at the Mitchell Center talk so often about things that being interconnected, but it doesn't always seem real in a way that you've helped us really see that it's real. If students were to begin to really learn from you and what you've done, if you could pick out, say, 5 sort of majors or graduate degrees that they should think about pursuing and also bringing together, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, thanks, Linda, for all your kind comments. I think you mentioned graduate degree specifically. Was the question?
Or undergraduate,
Sure,
either. Yeah.
I'm going to start with, the public health epidemiology degrees, not even epidemiology, we'll even leave it at public health. It's to me, it's a great place to be in that. I'm not sure if you'd even call it a discipline. Some people call it a discipline. Some people call it a field. To me, it's in that great middle space where you need to know a lot about different things. I'll give a shout out to the One Health program, including some of the students who are here as well. So that's talking about public health, specifically bringing together human health, animal health, and environmental health. But sort of more broadly, to me, that public health or environmental health is a great place where you can bring together a number of different interests. I guess we could start with that. I can keep going. I am cognizant of the time as well, Linda.
Uh-huh.
Hey, Linda, could I squeeze in one question here and then
You
straight
bet.
back to you?
You bet.
I'm just curious because you mentioned that there's a lot of multidisciplinary work. So you looked at, how many people were getting sick and when. I'm just curious, did you ever try and get the data and see analyzing what type of bacteria or virus or parasites were making people sick and maybe pairing with someone with that expertise to figure out, okay, what are the main issues here, in terms of the microorganisms, and then maybe ways to specifically target the worst ones in the community?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So kind of, I guess, two-part answer. So that's makes a lot of sense. So if I'm kind of muddling around looking about what might be out in the environment, it probably might make sense to also go specifically to the people that are sick and see what's making them sick. So I haven't done a lot of that research as well, but I will say that there is that, that type of work is happening in the regions that I'm talking about as well. One of the things that makes it difficult, both for that type of sort of more medical work as well as environmental work, is access to labs, timely access. So I talked about the remoteness. So one of the big challenges of all research, but in particular anything that has time-sensitive samples, is that there's no accredited labs. You sort of bring your own lab because other things are probably not going to make it to where they need to go. So that is one of the challenges that the region and researchers and hospitals and things are making some progress on as well. So I'm not doing that work, but people are.
Another question that has been asked, first the person said, thank you for your excellent presentation, and then asked, although it is bad for the environment, does bottled water have any positive impact, or is it prohibitorily expensive to ship it to the territory?
Linda, could I just, what type of water have any?
Bottled water.
Bottled
Yeah.
water.
Yeah.
I don't have a nice clean answer for that. What I'm going to suggest that person can do to have a really good, current read on is, so I mentioned in Ecology, there is a current water emergency unfolding. It's hopefully towards the end right now, but essentially this town's water supply became contaminated, and it took a long time to figure out that there was actually some sort of fuel infiltrating their holding tank from some historical spill. Anyhow, one of the solutions, obviously they needed water, was flying in plane load after plane load of water. And obviously that's what's needed in the moment. But when you start to think about the extreme costs and that kind of thing, it's about finding that balancing act. And then how do we get rid of these bottles? And then, so that's what I suggest this person, if they're interested in that and sort of thinking about where do we strike the balance here? There's all kinds of interesting news stories on that right now where that's great. We really are glad this bottled water came when we needed it. Now we literally have tens of thousands of plastic bottles because we don't have recycling services here either. And what do we do with these? So did we solve one problem that was very urgent, but did we create another one?
Yeah, so important. David, did you have another one that you wanted to add?
We may be to our last one in terms of time.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'm curious about involving the locals in suggesting solutions. And were any of the water professionals that were there already doing that? Or was your suggestion kind of coming in new? And also, have you seen any change towards that happening more in that area or in other places you've been working?
Right. So I wouldn't, I hope some changes. Let me start at the first your question. These weren't all entirely new ideas. So there certainly are some water professionals there working for the territorial government, as well as some more locally trained in the communities. And they had some ideas about this system works, it kind of works, and it works at this time of the year, and it doesn't work in that way, but it works at this time. So it's always been kind of, this is sort of what we always have had, and knowing sort of the limitations around resources and the reality that there's not going to be this brand new renovated system next year. I think what I tried to come in and learn from that was to think about, when I got back to mitigating risk and things like that. So speaking specifically on water systems, water professionals, I showed those two pictures on the wastewater side of what they call a mechanical system or a passive system. The region, through the water professionals, is there with a bit of research help, has really moved to that passive side now. So as far as water management decisions and some change been made, There has been a movement to specifically focus on that, and then we can understand and put the people like me who are interested in the health implications, we can sort of focus on mitigating those.
So I think in the interest of time, even though I'm sure Linda has more questions from the virtual audience, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's true in the room as well, we have a meeting with Kiley to have these career discussions down the hall. So let's thank Kiley again for a wonderful talk.